on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review, and this is our usually weekly show where we review the Magic stories. Recently, we've been doing twice a week. You can watch some of our other videos to understand why, or maybe I'll explain it later, whatever. But we are back this time with more Kamigawa Neon Dynasty stories. We are back to the side stories, and I say back to because the Kaito origin stories are under side stories, and they are the first two, but we did those a while ago based on when they were released. And so now we are back with essentially side story number 3, I guess. The Blade Reflected and Reborn by Emma Miko Kandon. My quick review at the top of this one is, I feel like we will differ here slightly. This is 100% an Amy story. I despised it. I just did. I will have some things to talk about, but this will be more of an Amy episode than a Joe episode. So strap in and look forward to it, because there's definitely important things to talk about. But I did not like this story kind of at all. So,
you know what? That's fair. And it being an Amy story doesn't mean I liked it either.
Sure.
Because I didn't. I'll explain it to you now, because in the actual analysis of the story itself, I'm not going to say why I didn't like it.
Sure.
I didn't like it because it was very combat heavy. And I'll kind of explain the importance of it being that. So, like, I feel that the story did what it was trying to do. I feel that the story gave a lot of importance to these characters, gave a lot of importance to the tasks at hand, the way it should have, regardless of it being in a sort of uncomfortable and unlikable way, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And if you've read the story, then you probably know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be talking about that later as well, but yeah, definitely.
If you haven't read the story and you're just here to watch this video, it's going to be hard to grasp. And I say that because reading the story alone was hard to grasp. But what I'm going to try to do, in a lot of what I'm talking about at least, is take these sort of abstract concepts that they kept throwing out and kind of turn them into a real world analogy. So even if you didn't read it, I kind of hope to, or if you did and had trouble following it, I hope to kind of pull you back in to something that's a little bit easier to stick with for your mind, because this story is, like I said, it's very abstract, it's very long, and you have to work to pay attention to it and understand what's happening. And after a while, your brain decides to stop doing that because it's so long that your mind's like, okay, I need a break, I can't do this. So yeah, my quick review is I didn't like it either. But there's a lot to it, and we'll get to that.
Yeah. So, for those of you who are still interested in checking out the story if you have not already, or reminding yourself of this story if you read it a while ago, the top link in the description down below will take you to this story so that you can read it for yourself. We remove as many barriers as possible so that you can get into it, and then of course, if you do leave to go read it or look at it again, we of course would then love it if you would return back here and join us for this discussion. And with all of these JaAR videos, any thoughts that you have on anything that we've said, our quick review, our extended review, any opinions, any quotations, etc., leave your opinions, your thoughts, etc. in the comments down below. That is what they are for. Keep the conversation going, super important. Before we get into the full review itself, hi, welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for being here. If you like the things that we're doing, please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so that you will get notifications whenever any of our videos come out, including more JaARs in the coming weeks. Again, 2 a week at this point, which is why I mentioned it in the way that I did, and going into the Streets of New Capenna stories, which will start in like a week and a half or so, here on this channel. The stories themselves for Streets of New Capenna start the day this video comes out, so be aware of that, I suppose. But yeah, and then also check out our other channels, linked down in the description box below, again, in addition to the link to this story. We've got Video Games for All, we've got Gluten Free for All. Both have new stuff coming out or that has already come out. If you are interested in the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney series in any capacity, we played that game blind to both of us. The kind of the draw of that series is I am a licensed attorney, and so the two of us went through that game blind and tried our best to play through it. And so you can check out the first episode of that series that released yesterday at the time that this video is coming out. Like I said, over on Video Games for All, link in the description box below. So definitely check that out. And then Generation 3 of Pokemon is starting next Tuesday, the first Tuesday in April. Amy has gone through the first generation in Pokemon Red and the second generation in Pokemon Silver, and now it is her time to go through either Ruby or Sapphire. We have not said which it is yet, but people have been loving that series, a dedicated, awesome community of viewers over there on Video Games for All for specifically the Pokemon series, but of course all of our stuff as well. So if that's something that interests you, definitely go check out that on Video Games for All also. And Amy, Gluten Free for All this month.
Yeah, I'm going to be making cauliflower crust, lactose-free, steak, onions, pepper, and mushroom pizza. So, per request by our chat during our streams.
Which we stream, thank you Amy, what an amazing segue. We stream every Monday and Friday, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on this channel. Mondays, the day this video comes up, and for you Magic the Gathering fans, we stream MTG Arena, and every Friday, we stream whatever video game we happen to be playing at the time. This Friday we will be continuing our playthrough of X-Men Legends 2 Rise of Apocalypse for the PlayStation 2. And as Amy likes to say, on the PlayStation 2.
Yeah.
So,
because I think it's impressive that we have a working
a working PS2, a working N64. Yeah, we've got some good stuff over here. So definitely stay tuned to all of that great stuff on all these channels. Truly, truly, we appreciate any and all support that you're willing to give. Subbing and ringing the bell helps us out a lot, but it also helps you. But then if you want to help us even a little bit more, don't forget on any video that you're watching, likes are super helpful. Streams as well you can like, and sharing with somebody who you also think might enjoy it. Also super helpful. So thank you in advance for any and all of that you're willing to do. We really appreciate it. But without further ado, on to the full review itself. I actually liked, there's something I liked, I promise. I thought it was actually kind of interesting to hear about Far Corner. And that kind of, I have the names written down here. Shishiro talking about the fact that talking about the fact that the Far Corner town is far enough outside of Tawashi that it's not close enough to Beseiju to be cared about. It's not under the skyscrapers, so it's kind of ignored. There are absolutely those towns that are not relevant enough to kind of the local hustle and bustle city and that can get neglected. And there are other reasons why towns and areas can be neglected, don't get me wrong, and that's not, in this particular instance, what I'm referencing, but that also occurs. But in this instance, it's just like, the town is like inconsequential to the state at large, if you will, and so it's not given as much time and focus. And Shishiro notes that, and I found that really interesting. It's like, that's not something that I expected to hear them talk about when it comes to, for lack of a better term, a Magic the Gathering town. So I liked that. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. I think that has a nice parallel to the real world as well. There are many towns that were, or I shouldn't say were, I should say are, forgotten or neglected by larger governments, local governments.
Right, there are individual elected officials or whatever the case may be. Like,
I mean, think about how long Flint, Michigan has had, issues with the water.
It's true. Well, but that's why I was referencing, I don't personally, and I don't have a lot of knowledge on that situation. I know the little snippets of articles I've read here and there, but it's not really fully appropriate for me to speak on the issue. But what I'll say is I took that more as an issue of the demographics of the town versus the demographics of the elected officials, or the resources that elected officials are willing to allocate to that certain area. I didn't take that as the area was inconsequential, and so they're not giving it that. I took it as it was more a slight against the populace of that area, as opposed to the kind of the location of the land itself and its prosperousness or lack thereof.
Right. Okay.
So I took that as different things.
Yeah.
But I
took the effect as different things, although I saw the initial cause to be the same.
Well, they're definitely comparable, don't get me wrong. I just was attempting to make the distinction for myself, just in terms of how I was referring to those.
I see what you're saying, and that's probably, I kind of agree with what you're saying, that I think it's probably not really that comparable, to be honest.
Yeah. I appreciated that was something that was brought up. It's not something that, that you hear about too often, but it's something where you're like, oh yeah, no, definitely, absolutely.
Yeah.
I also liked that we're talking about the Goshintai of Boundless Vigor, the shrine, because by the end of this story, like, I've played against Goshintais of Boundless Vigor on Arena or in paper, where it's like, at the end of the turn, I'll pay one, it gets a counter. At the end of the turn, I'll pay one, it gets another counter. It gets another counter, it gets another counter, it has trample, and it's like, oh, if I don't kill this thing, I die. Like, that. This will kill me.
What's going to happen?
Yeah. And again, if you have other shrines, it gives those counters to other shrines as well. But like, even just by itself, it just gives itself a counter every turn. You get more shrines, it gives itself more counters every turn. It's like, it gets way out of hand. And so what I will say, again, something else I liked, the story does a very good job of showing what that might look like. It's horrifying, and so for that half a moment when you're playing against it in Magic in some capacity, and you're like, oh god, this could overwhelm me so quickly, that is what those people were feeling, right? And so, like, that I appreciated. That was a very good one-to-one comparison with an actual mechanic of a card. It makes it super flavorful, and it's awesome. So that was very well done. Very well done. Okay. Then I want to talk a bit about the conflict of this story. Why Chishiro was here. Why he was hired to be with the people of this town.
Yeah. Okay.
But I want to talk about it here, but the story didn't talk about it until about a quarter of the way through. And this partially starts the ball rolling on why I didn't like this story. Because my head, when I'm reading these stories, maybe it's because I'm reading them with the lens of I have to review it later, as opposed to just sitting back and enjoying reading a story. So maybe that's the situation, right? I don't want to just say everyone should have felt this way or whatever.
No, of course.
But I sat down to read the story and I'm like, okay, let's write down who these characters are. Like, we have Chishiro, they're in Far Corner. We have Ayari, we have Kaima, which is his... First of all, I thought that was the name of his sword. It wasn't. It was the kami that he was bonded to through the focus of his sword. That was a little confusing in the beginning, but that's fine. It eventually explained itself, so that's not a huge deal. But we learn about all these different characters, all these different places. I'm writing all this stuff down so that I have it in my mind, so that I can remember all these characters. Ayari was relatively inconsequential. Like, if it had just been the girl in the town, it would have meant exactly the same to me. Like, I get that it's important to, like, have a character's name so you can bond to that person and, like, care about them, but, like, her personality was very not fleshed out. Like, there just wasn't enough time for it. And thank God that they didn't spend the time, because I don't think either of us mentioned it yet. This story, oh no, you did. The story was long as hell. It was so long. But yes, you did mention that, so thank you. But that dictation of the fact that Shishiro was there and hired to help them stop the Reckoners who were coming to, like, get to the shrine. And so they had Shishiro hired so that he could come in and do that. That wasn't told to us until about a quarter of the way through. So it's like, how are we supposed to know what this story is about? You don't tell us the conflict of this story until a quarter of the way through. And until then, you're just waffling on. Like, introducing a character is great, and it's important, especially in this story that so heavily focuses on Shishiro. And maybe that's why I don't like, or part of the reason why I don't like this story is I still don't feel like I know who Shishiro, well, that's not fair. I guess I know who Shishiro is. He's just not, I guess he's not really a likable protagonist, which you, again, talked about as well. That, like, am I supposed to root for this guy? Like, what enjoyment am I supposed to get out of this story in any, like, capacity? And I don't mean, like, every story has to be happy and fun, but, like, I should enjoy, like, the entertainment of reading the story, even if it is violent or sad or whatever. Like, you can still get entertainment out of a sad story. It doesn't have to be that you're smiling the whole time, but, like...
Yeah, and this story was very much supposed to be, like, a teaching moment. And I think that it... I mean, I won't say that it missed the mark in trying, you know, in being entertaining, because I don't think it was trying to do that.
Yeah. Okay.
But also, like, if your story is super long, super hard to follow, super abstract, and unlikable all at the same time, how, I mean...
Yep.
Who's going to like the story? Yeah. I mean, I can sit here and do a review on it and talk about it and analyze it and say what I feel like the story is meaning to do. But I'm still sitting here saying I didn't like the story. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
You know, is it that important to have a story that is a teaching moment if it can't be a story that people like?
Sure. Right, because then no one's going to learn that lesson. Because no one's going to take the time to read it. Because even if they come to watch a video like this, like, we're both starting with, like, we didn't like it. Here's our review of it, but it's not an enjoyable thing. Like, you know, it's long, and
I said it was important, you know, and that I'm going to take the time in this video to try to help people understand it and sort of create those parallels that I feel like the story wasn't doing on purpose, right? To keep it more abstract.
Yeah.
So that maybe people don't have to go and read the story then, right? But that still doesn't make anyone like it.
Yeah.
So.
One of the things that frustrated me about the beginning portion of this story with the, like, a lot of this story is separated by the delineations, the lines drawn across horizontally to show passage of time, change of perspective, in this case, flashback versus back to the present kind of a thing. There was a flashback before we find out what the main conflict of the story was. Just, in my opinion, just swap them. Just swap those two sections with the lines delineating them. Just go like this. And then it would be fine. So you give the conflict of the story, we understand what's going on, then we get this flashback that is relevant and important to understand, but not at the time that it's put there. At that point, it's irrelevant. It's like, I still don't know why I should give a damn.
Right.
And we're almost a quarter of the way through this very long story. So if I'm expected to sit here and invest my time in reading this story, give me a reason to.
Well, I mean, there is a reason to, but I'll let you finish your point.
I was just going to say, like, there's the concept in movies, books, etc., that you want to grab the viewer's attention quickly. So the like somewhat facetious statement is that, you know, the first like 15, 20 minutes of a movie should have sex or violence or something that, so that it catches your attention. Then you want to cut from that to like two people like just talking about their lives, right? Sex in the City or Gilmore Girls style in that way. Like, that's fine.
Okay.
But you need that moment to grab people's attention, because otherwise, why would I stay? And so I guess that can be to you where you said you were going to talk about that. So
I mean, there's a purpose, but
you seem very exacerbated about that purpose.
It's not the purpose that's exacerbating.
Okay.
It's getting there.
Sure.
Right? So it's the story being so just the way the story is. Not allowing you to get to the point of the story.
Yeah.
Basically until the end. I mean, the very last line is where you finally learn the reason why the story exists.
Yeah, and I guess that's your reward for like trekking your way or sludging your way through the story to get to it, is you're like, oh, I see.
Well, you mentioned the protagonist being an unlikable protagonist, and I would argue that the protagonist isn't a protagonist at all.
Sure.
And that's really the purpose of the story, is that there is no protagonist or antagonist.
Yeah.
In real life, there is no good versus evil. There is just life.
Yeah.
And everybody is just trying. And there are a lot of failures, a lot of monumental failures sometimes too. Or you're very, very wrong about whether a decision that you've made is in any way correct. You know, or it just has terrible repercussions. But that doesn't mean that you're an evil person. You know, redemption exists and change does happen. And people do sometimes have that aha moment that they need to make them realize that they don't want to be the person they are. And there's that line in the story that I didn't have you write down, so don't bother trying to look, where, you know, they said, you know, how they were talking about how much they hated themselves and each other, and yet saying, like, you know, maybe at some point, like, I don't want to be this. I don't want to be the person I am. And that is a thing that happens to people a lot more than people like to act like is the case.
Well, and maybe more often than people even fully realize within themselves that they've gotten to that point, but they haven't said it out loud, even in their own minds, to know that that's where they are.
You know, and this culture that we live in makes it difficult for people to have those realizations and to do those things that would make them better people, because the culture is very black and white and is very, you know, everything is right and wrong, good and evil. And again, that might go back to it, just that is better for a story to be good. But the consequence of that is so monumental. The consequence of people living their lives that way because the media or politics or whatever it is, the economy, you know, whatever it is, sets the stage for that so easily because it's a good story. You know, so a good story for the media, you know, a good story for media, not the media.
Right.
So media as in movies, you know, TV shows, things like that, as well as the media, meaning like the news, right? So they're still writing good stories, you know, and just kind of basing it on the reality of what happened. But feeding that monster that duality mentality. Oh my God, that's ridiculous.
Hell yeah.
That nice. Duality mentality, feeding that monster perpetuates the problem. So it continues and worsens constantly because they're constantly feeding that monster.
Yeah.
And so the point of the damn story is that it's not real. It's a facade. It's a surface distortion. It's a distorted picture that's on the surface of what reality actually is behind it, which is that we're all connected and we're all the same and we all need the same things and want the same things. When we're not fully consumed by our how would I say that right? By our inabilities to see that reality.
Okay.
And that's what the whole story is about. It's about these two people fighting against each other for nothing. I mean, for the sake of revenge and just hatred that doesn't actually need to exist.
No, it benefits nothing. It benefits no one.
Right.
Yeah.
Because in reality, they specifically say that connection that they have, connections are it. Mm-hmm. Connections are the thing that makes us all the same, that makes us not good or evil. It makes us all people. It makes us grounded to that reality as opposed to only able to see that facade. So without those connections, all that's there is the facade. There's nothing deeper. And so the whole story is about them learning that there's something behind that facade. And what teaches them that is their connection to each other. Despite the fact that they hate themselves and each other, what shows them that reality is the fact that they're bound to each other in that way. So,
yeah.
We'll get to that when we go to the end. But
Sure. I wanted to ask you, did you ever think, before we started reading this story, did you ever think that there was a universe where a story would be written in any capacity starring Tatsunari Toad Rider that you wouldn't love?
No. Yeah. And you know, the thing of it is that this story, again, it's so abstract. And so it makes it, you don't think of these characters as what these characters are. Mm-hmm. You don't think of a giant boar. You don't think of a giant toad.
Yeah.
You don't think of a guy riding a giant toad. You don't think of a lizard person, you know, and...
That's one of the Arachi snake.
Yeah, all of those things sound like things I would freaking love, right? Drool all the way. But this story takes you out of those characters because it puts you there instead. So those characters are just part of that facade. It's more of that separation that doesn't actually exist.
Yeah.
And so this story does an amazing job of that, because I think that's very deliberate, and I think that they did an amazing job of creating that element, which was putting yourself into those situations and putting your own mind there and forgetting and letting the physicality of these characters fall away, because it's not about physicality, and it's not about how these different creatures are different from each other. It's about how all of us are the same.
Okay. We're up to the quotations. I don't know how you tell me how you want to work it. Do you want me to read them off and then you talk about them?
Yeah.
Okay. So well, there are some quotes that were written down that either Amy asked me to write down or I just knew. I was like, oh, this is important, and we wrote it down. But regardless, here are some quotes from the story, and I will kind of look to you when I'm done reading it so that you know when it's the end. Because this first one is rather long.
Yeah.
Familiar, like an old scar split open, like blood on his tongue and sick in his gut. Chishiro had in that moment been reduced, honed. He had been a yawning deep, and now he was the small, dark hollow at the center of it. A hollow in need of filling. He had gone many long years with this absence within him. He had never thought to give it a name, for he had thought it obvious. Treachery and betrayal. His own lacking self. And so he had never thought to fill it. It hadn't seemed the sort of wound that could be mended.
Yeah. If there was ever a paragraph in a story that wasn't in itself a book on psychology that was truer, in my mind, to the experience of trauma, I would love to know what it is. Please leave it in the comments.
Chapter and verse, please.
Yeah. And or, if you have a good resource, just a good book, you can leave that in the comments as well.
That's true. Amy would love that. Truly would love that.
Because this paragraph is so... It's just a direct parallel to if you were to open up a psychology trauma textbook, right, and just read it from cover to cover, and you felt like two at arm's length from it because it was a textbook.
Right, so like meaty and, yeah.
And just like you couldn't really relate to it, and then you read that paragraph, you would get it. You would say, okay, I get it now. I had to read that whole textbook from cover to cover to give me the baseline information that I would need to understand this quote. And then, now that I understood this quote, I understand the textbook. So, it's just every word is exactly what a beautiful writer would write about what a psychologist would say about trauma. So, yes, if you would do me the favor of reading that again,
oh, yeah.
I can kind of like break it apart a little bit.
Okay, so you want me to do it slowly so that you can like interrupt in parts that you want to talk about?
Yeah.
I can absolutely do that. Familiar, like an old scar split open.
Okay, so right there, that familiarity, they're talking about his recognition of the other character or of the place?
It was him recognizing Tatsunari.
Right. Okay.
So the little aspects of Tatsunari being familiar to him. The blade in Tatsunari's hand, the look on Tatsunari's face, the smile, etc.
Right. And so, but they used the word familiar.
Yes.
Because it is... When he was reading this, I said, write that down, because it sounds like a repressed memory. It sounds like he doesn't know what he's recognizing, but he's recognizing it.
Yeah.
So arguably, it's not recognition, right? Because recognition would mean you're seeing it and then understanding. Recognition lends, the word recognition, like, lends you to the concept of, like, filling in that space that you can't do with a repressed memory, right? Because it's forgotten. And so it's like if recognition was a process that your mind takes.
Okay.
Where your eyes see something, or your any sense that you have senses something. You know, maybe it's a smell or a touch or something. But your senses take in the information, and then your mind processes the information. And then when that conclusion is made, that's recognition, right?
Okay.
But he's like missing the process because it's a repressed memory. So your mind is blocking out that process. It's happening without your cognizance. It's a triggering event, right? So to sense whatever it is, is triggering. So something I've said on this show a lot is that your logical mind shuts off, protecting you from it, basically. And then, so you go right to fight or flight. You know, you sense the thing, and then instead of having that decision-making process happen where you can apply logic to it, you go straight from, I sensed it, fight or flight. And there's nothing in between. And you skip the part where your brain actually applies any kind of like educated guess to what it is that you're sensing. And it's just based on instincts at that point. And it's thinking the thing that you're sensing is dangerous. And so Shishiro like dashes off, like he's already in fight mode.
Yeah.
Without even like knowing why. He just like does it.
Yeah, I thought about the fact that like it ruins the plan that he had helped set up.
Right.
And I'll talk about it later. But yeah, that decision it leads to some things. So.
Well, and that's the thing. Like I would almost argue it's a lack of decision.
I heard it after I said it. I apologize. You're absolutely right.
I don't think you need to apologize for that.
But that action led to a lot of things.
It is a decision, but it also isn't.
Yeah.
It's a decision that you make, but it's based on a lack of information.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Whereas that's not the decision that someone else would make in that situation.
Right.
Because they would be able to apply logic to it.
Right. They'd be like, I know I'm upset, but there's this whole plan, and it's actually better if we just follow along with the plan, because then we could take him out easier, instead of like, I have to get to him right now, gotta kill him.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So you want me to keep going with the quote?
Yeah.
Okay. So we had already said, familiar like an old scar split open. Like blood on his tongue, and sick in his gut. I actually really liked that portion of it, just because, like, I'm not a person, without getting too in-depth, especially if folks are eating or whatever while they're watching this, I'll try to go over this quickly.
Yeah.
I am someone who does not often vomit.
Same.
In my life. It's just, I know that there are people like that, and that sucks, and I'm so sorry. I am not that guy, thankfully. And so it is few and far between for me to feel that and experience that, like, nausea, but, like, extreme nausea where I feel like it's going to cause something more.
Right.
And when I do, it has the ability to remind me of the last time or one of the more extreme times or whatever, because you feel that and you're like, oh God, it's that feeling again. Like, I know now what this is going to be. But, like, if you were to just ask yourself on any random day, like, hey, try to experience that feeling of nausea, or, you know, like, think about what that feels like. You're not necessarily going to be able to do that, but...
Unless it happens to you a lot.
Right. So I liked that line. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I liked that line because, you know, it adds, like, a visceral component.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, what I've talked about already, you know, when you're in fight or flight mode, things really change from a physiological standpoint as well. You know, I mean, obviously everybody knows, like, what adrenaline does to you. You know, like, it makes your heart race, it makes your blood pump, and you can, like, feel it. You know, things like that. But when it's associated with trauma, there's usually, like, more to it. I know for me and for a lot of other people too, it's a stomach thing. You know, so I liked that they mentioned that there.
Yeah.
Because it really, like, I think lets other people know, or lets the readers know, like, hey, we're trying to, like, get you to understand what we're saying here, but we're also, like, trying to have you relate.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, maybe you can imagine a bit of it yourself. Right. A bit.
Right. Like I said, like, this story really tries to put you in it. So you forget what these characters look like. You forget what, I mean, like, these names are a little bit tricky maybe, but, like...
For us, like, Westerners,
right.
Like, you know.
So, like, it made us, like, not be able to remember who was who. But again, I think the story is written in such a way that it kind of wants you to forget the characters and kind of just strip away the outside. Then, like, it doesn't matter who they are, because in reality who they are is this stuff, the abstract stuff, the stuff that you can relate to, the stuff that's really real and really deep and really visceral and really you know, just stuff that affects them so much, you know, in, like, a way that puts you in the story a lot more than just being someone on the outside looking in at it.
Interesting. And again, right, we differ in I didn't like this story. So maybe I'm looking for reasons to say, but I feel like with magic stories, especially side stories, I have been conditioned to have those side stories be a legendary creature that we are focusing on. And this story is Shishiro'S story.
Right.
Right? Shishiro the Shattered Blade. I was looking behind at the picture, which is behind the camera. But Shishiro the Shattered Blade is the card. That's the name of the card. That's the character. That's who we're working with here today. So that's the character who I am looking to read a story about. along the way. We meet Tatsunari as well, Toad Rider, but that is the antagonist to Shishiro's protagonist. And like Amy said, there just isn't like a protagonist-antagonist thing. It's just, but at the same time, as a broad aspect, to me, that's not what I was expecting going into this story. Mm-hmm. And if you're gonna write a story like what Amy is talking about and trying to teach in that way, then don't put like the facade of a Magic the Gathering story on it. You know what I mean? Like, does that make sense? Is that rude?
No.
Like, Amy might not get this reference. It's the whole point of Video Games for All. But it reminds me of Super Mario Brothers 2. I'm not going to remember the name off the top of my head, but I used to. There was a game that was going to be released in Japan.
Okay.
And it was not an existing IP, essentially. And so they just took those characters and made them Mario characters. But it was nothing like the first Mario game that was released.
Okay.
Like, the things that the characters could do. So, to me, it was kind of putting that paint over the top of it, but it didn't, like, spiritually follow along with what the original game was, and kind of even where the franchise went going forward.
Okay.
So,
I mean, I would argue this is actually very in line with the Magic stories.
Okay.
But I will say, not the Magic stories from Kamigawa.
Okay. Okay.
This iteration of Kamigawa.
Sure.
Not the original.
Yeah.
But, yeah, because the stories so far from this set have not been following the trauma through line the way a lot of the other Magic the Gathering stories did.
Yes, specifically Midnight Hunt was the one that you kind of went hard into it, but where it was like every single one had at least a bit. Mm-hmm. But it's been a lot of them, I will definitely agree with that.
But yeah, I mean, before that, it used to be the entire story was about that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what the stories were.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know, Emrakul, Nissa, Nahiri, Drana.
Jace. Oh yeah, Drana, big time.
General Tazri.
Thank you. I was gonna get there for you.
Like, all of these characters, Vraska, all of these characters were so entrenched in trauma, and then the stories about them were written so beautifully and so perfect and so on the mark. And then to have it kind of all just sort of dwindle down to nothing was rough.
Yeah.
You know, this one brings it back, but it has a very different feel to it. It's much less, here's a character that you're gonna love, and their lives were traumatic.
Right.
And here's how.
Right. And
it's much more... trauma is this big, overarching, all-affecting thing. And here is the philosophical, abstract, macro ways in which it affects people overall, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that at least with the old way of telling stories, because I said it briefly, but I agree with you that that's a very good point to bring up. That these stories used to be very much this, and then they changed, and so now I'm sitting here being like, that's not it. No, it is. You're absolutely right.
Well, I'm saying it's...
It hasn't been for a bit, but it should be again.
Well, I'm saying the way that they approached it's still very different this time than it used to be.
Right.
Because it's very much like, a philosophy book instead of a psychology book.
Right, and that's what I was going to say. So the older characters, what they did was, they were like, here's this character, you love them, and so when you see the trauma that they've experienced, or hear about the trauma that they've experienced, you feel for them in that. Because you're like, oh my god, that is awful. Like, Vraska doesn't deserve that. Drana didn't deserve that. General Tazri doesn't deserve that. Like, all these things. Shishiro here? Okay, I mean, it sucks. But again, not a very likable protagonist here. And that, please let me say, that does not mean he deserves to have been traumatized, and that does not mean that his experience is any less than any of the other people that we've mentioned, or any less valid than any of the other people that we mentioned. Please don't misunderstand. It's just, it's harder to kind of put myself in his shoes in that way for me, because I'm seeing that going on, and it's like, you know, I was just struggling so hard to, we haven't really talked about this yet, maybe we can skip ahead to do that, but I was struggling so hard to just make sure that I understood what the hell was going on at any given time, let alone then focusing on the intricacies of the traumatic experiences that he was going through, the triggering situation that he had been put in, or had been thrust upon him. Like, I was just trying to make sure that, like, these metaphors were being kept in my head, because they weren't. I mean, I lost it maybe about halfway through, I think. I forget where I wrote it down. But, like, yeah. Am I cutting you off or to not finish a point that you were trying to make? I wanted to get into that, but I didn't want to jump around too much. I think that this story is very deep, and like Amy said, very philosophical. And I want to be able to understand all of those deep philosophical things. The author took the time to write about it. These characters may exist at some point in the future, and their story, or the style of how they are going to be written, may stay consistent. So I want to make sure that it's something that I am paying attention to and cognizant of, because that may be who they are and how they are going to continue to be presented. This story didn't do that for me. It didn't give me the, oh, okay, great. I think that stories that are so symbolic or metaphorical, a good version of that story to me would be one that you can enjoy without fully grasping the metaphor and getting little bits and pieces of it here and there. And if you get the metaphor, it's like mind-blowingly awesome for you, right? So it works both ways for both members of that audience, so to speak, or both classes of that audience. I feel like I was in the class of, like, you know, got little bits and pieces here and there, and I didn't enjoy myself in the process. Whereas I just felt like I was missing something the whole time. And with that in the back of my mind of, like, what am I missing? Why don't I understand where this is going? Like, do I have to go back? Did I miss something that bad? Did I miss something that vitally important that, like, I need to stop and go back to the beginning of the story so that, like, I can better grasp what's happening here? Because I don't want to do that. The story is so goddamn long that I don't have time personally to go back to do that. Whether or not we would be filming the show, like, I just wouldn't have time to do that. So I was very frustrated reading this story, because I almost, and people are more than welcome to say that, like, they got it immediately and they have no idea what I'm talking about, and I must just not be there mentally. And for this particular story, or if you feel in general, I suppose. I guess you're entitled to your opinion. But
rude.
And you, like I said, you can absolutely say that. But to me, consistently felt like my intelligence was being insulted while I was reading the story. Because I was like, I don't understand what the hell's happening. I just feel like an idiot. And...
that's kind of the thing. I think you're too much of an intelligent person. This story's very wise, and it leans very heavily into the audience being so as well.
Yeah.
And so, if you're much more of a logical thinker and much less of an abstract, almost poetic, like, frame of mind, it's not going to be easy to get through and actually understand what's going on. It's just not. Yeah,
the thing I wrote down here, literally, it's not a quote, but what I wrote in the moment was, the deeper metaphors here are brutal, and it feels like if you didn't hold tight to this complex metaphor for the long amount of time that it takes to get through this story, that by the time you get to the end, you've lost it completely. And there's just nowhere for you to go. There's, like, very little for you to latch onto to be like, oh, thank God, I understand this part. You're just like, you're like reading a part of the story and you're like, I have no idea what's happening. Just none whatsoever.
There isn't anything for you to latch onto at that point because they went all in with the metaphor. And if you weren't there for it, you were missing the train.
Yeah. It feels like you started reading a story halfway through and you're just like, what's happening? Why is this being referenced? What does this mean? Yeah. So that's how I felt. And again, I felt stupid. And please don't misunderstand. That doesn't mean that if you didn't get the metaphor that I think you're stupid. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I felt like I should have been able to fully understand it, and I didn't. And because of that, I felt like that was something wrong with me in that moment. I didn't appreciate that feeling while reading this story that's, again, supposed to be for entertainment. I don't know. Again, maybe that's a hang-up on my end, like Amy said, where it's intelligence versus wisdom, or however you want to put it, that, like, you know, it's like, I should be able to understand this concept. I'm a smart enough individual that, like, why am I not grasping this? But
because that's not what that means.
Yeah. Well, and because, you know, the thing that we talked about was, like, I was not, I guess maybe I wasn't hyper-focused on the specificity of each individual aspect of the metaphor for the full hour and a half that it took us to read this story. Like, and because of that, because I wasn't keyed into it the whole time and fully immersed in it, I lost it at one point. And once I lost it, there was no getting it back because the train just kept on rolling and I got left behind.
I don't think I was keyed into specificity at all.
Okay.
I think I stayed as general as I could, but jumped on that train.
Okay.
You know, I was like,
sure.
Shit, I'm gonna miss it. Ran, you know, slid on at the last second.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I'm here. You know?
Take me away.
Yeah. And I just let it do that. But there were definitely moments where I didn't know what was going on. And I said, wait a minute, go back. I'm not understanding this. And you said, no, it's this. And I was like, oh,
yeah.
Okay.
And for certain things, thank God I was actually able to do that. You know, where Amy was like, wait, tell me about this. And I was like, oh yeah, it's this. Like, they talked about this a little bit earlier.
And that's why we're a good team. Because
that's very true.
You're reading that story, and when I'm like, wait a minute, what's this logistics thing that I'm not understanding right now? You can be like, it's this.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, oh, okay, I get it now. But when it comes to this abstract, like, craziness stuff, I might try to explain that to you, and you might be like, okay, well, I still don't get it.
Yeah, that's nice. Thanks for the help.
Yeah, sometimes it helps. Yeah. Sometimes my explanation helps.
Yes, I agree.
But
I definitely agree. Did you want to try to keep going back through this, or you want to go to the next one?
I want to keep going through it.
Okay. Okay. So then, yeah, like blood in his tongue, on his tongue, and sick in his gut. Shishiro had, in that moment, been reduced, honed.
I loved those words, reduced, honed, because when you talk about being in fight or flight, it's almost like a tunnel vision thing. You don't actually get tunnel vision, right? But your awareness of everything around you is very different from reality in those moments. Because, again, that logical part of your brain has shut down. So that process is missing. You go straight to sensing and then reacting to danger. And there's nothing in between where you can apply knowledge and additional information that you're getting from the outside to formulate a conclusion about whether it's dangerous, right? You're going straight from, I've sensed this, it's danger, right? So that like closed offness, that tightening, where, you know, it goes from this open, big awareness to this tiny little hole that's deep, right? And like that, it's deep and it informs everything. You know, you're there. You know, if your world is this big and that's where you are, you don't know any of this. This is all gone.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. All that you have is this. This is where you are. So it very much is that like tightening, that closing of like a lens. You know, I think of like a camera lens when they like, you know, zoom in and then it closes.
Sure.
You know, it makes me think of that. And so I liked those words that they used there.
Reduced and honed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, it's literally the next line is exactly what you were just talking about. He had been a yawning deep, and now he was the small, dark hollow at the center of it. A hollow in need of filling. Exactly what you were just talking about. Mm-hmm. Like, almost word for word. Because you talked about deep, and I'm looking over here like, oh, yeah, yep, we're going to get there. He had gone many long years with this absence within him.
Yeah.
He had never thought to give it a name, for he had thought it obvious.
Okay, stop there. That, again, very, very closely speaks to the experience of trauma, where you go so many years, just that's your world. That's it. And
that's scary.
It's scary to you.
Sure.
Because you know it's not this. You know it's this.
Yeah.
And it's... So, to people who this is their world, this is scary.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, and not only that, right, something that I've always talked about in life in general, especially with, I usually relate it to kids. When kids leave their home with their parents and go to a more traditional school, a public school, even a private school, but they meet other people and they talk about their lives and how their home lives specifically in this case. Those kids don't know what they don't know. So to them, what they do with their families in their home isn't weird, because that's not a concept that they have built up. But if they say something about, let's say, a way that they live their life in their home, other people may look at them and be like, what are you talking about? Like, why would you ever do something like that? And now that kid, and again, in this respect, I'm talking about kids, but in that kid now is like, oh, is that not normal? Is that not a normal thing that everybody experiences? So like you were saying, right, if you're in the kind of pinhole aspect as opposed to the big one, you don't know that the big one is quote unquote normal. That's not an appropriate word to use, but
Well, I think in the instance of trauma, that doesn't really apply.
Okay.
Because you live in an abusive home as a child, you know you live in an abusive home.
Fair.
You're not sitting there going, oh, this is normal.
Yeah.
You're sitting there going, I need to leave.
Yeah.
I need to get out of here.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes you say, I'll do whatever it takes.
Yeah.
But when you're there, it's this.
Yeah.
And this is scary, but you know, deep down, it's worth it if it means that you don't have to live in an abusive home or, you know, consistently be experiencing whatever the trauma is that you're consistently experiencing. But yeah, I mean, it's scary and it's hard to react to it in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not used to reacting to things in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
You're used to reacting to things in a way that protects you from them, whether or not that is healthy. Because that's what your body is designed to do for you. Even though that isn't necessarily what's better for you. So that's why trauma work is so important, because you need to learn how to train your body to stop doing things that way and to do them a different way. So, yeah. I think we kind of got off topic, so please go back to it.
So, we just said he had never thought to give it a name, for he thought it obvious.
Oh, yeah, okay. So, giving it a name is super important. And what they mean by that is just talking about it. You know, I think I've said, probably in like the last episode we did of this, or a recent enough episode of JaAR, you know, I said, you know, being able to name it and being able to talk about it is what gives some of that power that's been drained from you back to you. It gives you a little bit more agency to be able to get to a point where you feel like you can start the process of actually like getting over what you've been through. And without that, you're not even at the starting line.
Yep.
So that part's really important. But it's also important not to just do that. I mean, it's important to be able to do that in an environment that is safe enough for you to do it, where you don't do it and then explode into a spiral of self-loathing or depression or whatever it could then be.
Sure.
So, you know, recommend finding a good therapist or, you know, a very close friend who's also been through something similar or whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. The only thing, you know, he had never thought to give it a name, for he had thought it obvious. Treachery and betrayal. His own lacking self.
That's interesting. He thought it obvious. He had never given it a name. He thought it obvious. Treachery and betrayal. So, those words are very indicative of this. He's still right there. He never thought to heal it. He never thought to give it a name. It was obviously treachery and betrayal. Meanwhile, the real answer is actually out here somewhere, right? And he just would not be able to see that because he's here. And treachery and betrayal.
Treachery and betrayal, his own lacking self.
His own lacking self. Again, he's right here. So he hates the treachery. He hates the betrayal that he feels he has suffered at the hand of somebody else.
Yeah.
Because that's what treachery is. That's what betrayal is.
Yeah.
But then, in the same breath, he is saying that it's him because he's lacking. He experienced that betrayal and that treachery because there's something wrong with him. Not because somebody else had an insecurity of their own that they were compensating for. That then they did these things to him because they didn't know how to be, right?
Right.
So he blames himself. Is there more to that specific quote, or is that where you?
Well, yeah. Sorry for the full quote that we read earlier. Yes, and so he had never thought to fill it because it said it needed filling, but he had never thought to fill it. He had never thought to give it a name. He'd never thought to fill it.
Right.
You want to keep going?
Mm-hmm.
And so then the last bit is it hadn't seemed the sort of wound that could be mended.
Right. And so a serious trauma of any kind wouldn't feel like you could heal from that.
Right, because otherwise it wouldn't be a serious trauma.
No.
It could be a minor trauma still, but it wouldn't be that serious.
Because you're here.
Yeah.
You can't see any of this. All of these endless possibilities that are the reality of the world are not possibilities to you. Your possibilities in your mind live inside this tiny circle. And that is it. So, and healing from that isn't one of them. That's not in there.
Yeah.
That's not where that lives.
Yeah.
That lives like way out here. As like on the outskirts of the outside.
So you have to be able to expand it, and once you get here, then it helps. But you have to get that work to get to that point, anywhere near that point in the first place. Yeah.
When I was at the beginning of my process, getting better from my trauma, and really in the middle too, I spent a lot of time thinking about other people who I wanted to be able to get better too. And thinking about the fact that they were living in denial about it and how upsetting that was for me. That's because they were here. They didn't see any of this. And when I would talk to them about it, it didn't make sense to them. Because they had no frame of reference for it. None. They were in this tiny circle. That was the entirety of their world.
Yeah.
And so when I expanded my circle and it was like this, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm seeing all these things on the outside of my little circle that are real. They're actually there. And I would tell these other people. But they were here. They couldn't see those things. And that's what that line is talking about. It's saying, when you're in it, you're in it. There is no understanding that you can be out of it. Which is why it hurts so much when people say that you need to decide to change. Because there's a modicum of truth to that, and there's a modicum of falsehood to that. The truth is, yes, you do need to decide to change in order to be able to. But the falsehood is that when you need to change that badly, you don't see changing as a possibility. And a lot of times, if it's really bad, you can't even see that you need to. Because again, you're here. So all of this doesn't exist in your mind. Even though it's real and it's there, in your mind, it's not. It just doesn't exist. So how can you believe in something that in your mind you know doesn't exist? You can't. So the thing that needs to happen needs to be a catalyst to push that lens open. So you can see this much. Because once you can see this much, you can say, oh, there's more.
Right, and then you might be more open to understanding that there could even be more and more,
that,
right?
And more after that,
yeah.
and more after that.
Okay. I get you.
But when this is all you see, and you're in that closed off, what were the words?
He was the small dark hollow at the center of it.
No, the
yawning deep. Reduced and honed.
Reduced and honed.
Sorry.
That's a tight closing. It's tight. It doesn't just open. So you need something. You need a catalyst and that catalyst is different for different people and different situations and different times and different places, right? So I can't say, here's the one thing that's going to do it for you guys, but what I can say is you need that catalyst, and that's what it really needs to be, is something that pushes the lens open a little bit. Because what, like we said a second ago, once it's open a little bit, then you realize it could open more.
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot more quotes here. Don't forget.
Okay.
So the next one is, again, kind of going along the same lines, but still. Shishiro knew not what to do with himself, absent Kaima. Even less with the sweeping surety that the responsibility for this destruction lay not wholly with the boy, but with himself. His frailty. His willingness to surrender.
Again, here's a moment where he's blaming himself. And it's not that he is taking responsibility.
No. Correct.
Because he could do that here, right? Where he could say, okay, he's not the only one who caused an issue here.
Yeah.
I did too. And sort of admit and take responsibility for the destruction, right? But instead, what he's doing is saying, It sucks because I can't blame it all on him. It's, because it's actually my fault for sucking so much and just, you know, surrendering and just letting it happen.
Right. I'm weak. His frailty, right?
Right. And do you see how those are two very different things?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you're kind of saying the same thing, right? You're kind of saying, I caused a part of this, right? That's the end result of both of those, is you're saying, I caused a part of this. But two very different ways of getting there.
Yeah, taking responsibility for your actions is a positive trait that people can have. Yeah.
Not healthy.
Yeah, whereas like beating yourself up for no reason and talking like all that negative speech kind of a thing.
Yeah. So, you know, what you would do in this situation is try to apply understanding to yourself. You know, try to say, and, you know, instead of saying, you know, I was weak for surrendering, so it's my fault, you could say, it was a rough situation. I did what I could do. And it didn't turn out great. And I admit that. And I'm sorry. The end.
And to go along with that, the next quote just is, we cut off a bit at the beginning of it, but he hated the man who threatened it, second only to how ferociously he hated himself. Same general idea. I mean, you can add to that if you want, but like,
but yeah,
along those same lines.
It's basically like, but it goes back to the original topic that we were talking about in this video, which was everybody's the same. You only hate him so much because you hate yourself so much.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't have to be. That hatred can go away. It doesn't have to be there. When you take away that hatred for yourself, you won't have it anymore for him. Because you'll learn how to apply that understanding to yourself, like we just talked about, and say, I admit it, I messed up. It wasn't just me, though. But it sucks.
Yeah.
It made a mess. I'm really sorry. You know, and those things, like learning to gain that compassion for yourself means that now you can apply it to him too. You can say, okay, do I want revenge? Yes. Does he deserve to die? No. Because no one does. And again, there's that duality there, that fighting against yourself of, I hate him so much. Treachery, betrayal. I hate myself so much. Weak.
And so much
surrendering.
And so much more, even, is what he says here.
Right? And that's a duality. They're fighting against each other. But that fighting can just end when you decide that the hatred doesn't need to be there.
Yeah.
This hatred can go away. This hatred can go away. And then the fighting ceases.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to exist.
Yeah. But they didn't get to that point yet.
Right.
In fact, the next quote that we have written down was, he, and I believe he is Shishiro here, but he was thinking of emptiness. This empty man, Tatsunari, This empty man lunged toward him, but if Tatsunari dug his sword into Shishiro, he would only find more emptiness.
Okay, so that's back to the hole.
Yeah, exactly, yes.
Right?
Correct.
That tiny hole, that hollow. And so he thought about it. He thought about that hollow that was in him and how empty he was. And then he realized that the person he hated so much and was fighting also had that hollow in him. And so that's why he was fighting him. Because he saw that hollow, or he felt it. So that was really the danger that his brain kept him from seeing, right? It was that hole inside yourself exists in him too. And you don't want to have that hole. And if you can kill him, then he won't have that hole. And so there will be one less of those holes that will exist. And so that's the process that his mind actually would have done, right? And if he didn't go into fight or flight in that early moment of the story, he would have been able to work through that. He would have been able to have that thought process and then go, oh, okay. So I want to kill the hollow in him because it's present in me. So instead, I don't have to kill it. I just have to see it in him, understand it, and apply compassion to it, because that'll fix both of the hollows, right? So, but he doesn't figure that out quite yet.
No, and in fact, the next quote, again, we partway through a sentence, but upon realizing the horrifying degree to which they were both nothing creatures, wretched in their lack.
Yeah, there's that hatred again. And the duality. They're both those wretched creatures.
Nothing creatures. Wretched in their lack.
Nothing creatures. Lacking. I hate him. I hate myself. It's all the same thing.
Right. And we heard that a lot with Shishiro because that's whose perspective we're getting. But the next quote that you had me write down, anger ran dark and jagged through Tatsunari's words. But beneath that fury, at once brittle and enduring, was despair.
Yeah. So that goes back to, like, what you learn in, like, Therapy 101. Is like, okay, what are you feeling right now? And you're like, well, I'm fucking mad because this fucking thing, right? That guy, and he did this. And she's like, okay, you know. It's Therapy 101.
That's great.
Where you learn, okay, what's underneath the anger? Because anger's, what did your mom tell
My
you?
mother always says that anger is never a primary emotion. There is some underlying emotion that anger is masking or taking the place of, or whatever you may call it, but that anger is never a primary emotion.
Right, so there's something else underneath. Fear, despair,
Shame in some cases as well, right?
That's a huge one for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that the anger is just masking that.
Yeah.
Right? Embarrassment, I guess, is shame as well.
Yeah.
But something to that effect, where if you're, I guess you can put this to your own self, but to others as well. If someone is that angry, there's a reason for it, and it's not just like, you know, you did something wrong and you made them mad. No, there could be a reason for that anger, for that degree of anger. And so if you can break that down and get to the core of what that is, or again, I say you, if you or some type of a mental health professional can break that down and get to the core of that, you may actually begin to try to heal where that's coming from and get to the root of that.
Well, and so that's what's going on here is he's saying, okay, this person is just as empty as I am, right? And so, like, if we kill each other right now, like, it'll just be a nothing person killing a nothing person, right? And in reality, what that means is that fighting is for naught, right? So his mind being here sees, I'm nothing, you're nothing, so if we kill each other, it'll just be two nothings killing each other, and nothing will change or matter or be affected.
Yeah.
But the reality of what that means, what that actually equates to out here, is we're the same, and fighting each other or having hatred for each other is needless. And killing each other is senseless. What was the part that you just read, though? Because I feel like I addressed the part before it.
Anger and dark and jagged through Tatsunari's words, but beneath that fury, at once brittle and enduring, was despair.
Because we already addressed that.
Yeah.
Okay, move on to the next one.
Yeah. So the next quote was a quote from Kaima, who was the kami at the heart of this story, a lot, where Shishiro had the kami, Tatsunari took the kami, or at least was bonded with, I should say. Tatsunari took it, hence the betrayal, and now Kaima is back and has kind of revealed itself again to Shishiro with Tatsunari in the area or town of Far Corner. And Kaima, one of the quotes that Kaima says is, only one sort of creature has enough heart, or has heart enough to betray another.
I found that one very interesting. Only one sort of creature has heart enough to betray another. Everyone has betrayed someone. And everyone has been betrayed by someone. Meaning there is only one sort of creature that has heart enough to betray another. We are all one sort of creature. We are all one.
I had something that I wanted to talk about that is mostly not related to this.
Okay.
In this moment of the story is where, oh God, it frustrates the crap out of me.
I'm so sorry.
This part, it's fine. This part in the story is where the kami of the Far Corner, or of Far Corner, that is in the shrine, and that Shishiro has been talking to a degree, but the kami has not been responding to him, but all these people show up and they're worshipping it, and etc., and he comes and talks to it every once in a while. The kami finally bursts free, and it's revealed that it's actually Kaima. Where was any of the setup for that at all? How was that? Like, that felt like it was supposed to be the moment of like, oh shit, that's who it was this whole time? And meanwhile, they're like, it was Kaima, and I'm like, oh, why? Like, it's just like, it went over like a wet fart. Like, it just was so... like I said, it felt like it was supposed to be this big thing. And the word I used here was it felt dumb. And again, maybe I was feeling dumb because I didn't get it, but it just didn't mean a damn thing to me at all. It was just like, oh, okay, so Kaima's in this shrine now, and now he's going to break out, and now all these vines are coming around and killing people and attacking everything. And
because again, it's abstract. So from a narrative standpoint, it's gonna make less sense because it doesn't need to make as much sense from a narrative standpoint, because again, it will make sense to that metaphor that you're on the train with.
yeah, and I've got one more of those at the end, but we've got two more quotes that you had me write down, so let's go into those. First was, but that there was the trick of a bond. Even when they lost hope in themselves, they could find it again, reflected in the other.
Yeah.
And so that is discussing the bond between Shishiro and Kaima that they used to share and are now, in some ways, reinvigorating, so to speak, with one another.
That line was the best line. It summed up the entire story, which is why it made sense for it to be the last line.
It wasn't the last line. There's this line.
Oh, okay.
The fragments thing.
Well,
sorry.
Very close.
It was very
to
close.
The end.
Yes. Sorry.
Where it's saying the connections that we have to one another are it. Those are the things that make life worth living. The end. Without those connections, life can't feel worth living. You'll feel like you're missing something. You'll feel like that hollow. That little hole that you just can't fill. Because you're not filling it with connections to other people. You're filling it with whatever the hell it is. You know, motorcycles or gambling.
Sure. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, like, you know, whatever it is,
whatever
right?
it is.
Yeah. Sure.
Whatever your vice is.
Yeah.
That you're filling that hole with, it's never going to fill it.
Yeah.
Because what it should be is connections, bonds. Because like I said, those are the things that make life worth living. And so you're going to feel like life isn't worth living if you don't have them.
Yeah. And so the last line that you were referring to, with the reunification of their bond, the way Shishiro does it is he holds up the sword flat in between the two of them, in between himself and Kaima. And the sword begins to like crack. Yeah. And not...
I forgot this part.
Yeah, and not break, but kind of the outer shell breaks off, kind of a thing. And it says, as the fragments fell away, one after the next, they revealed a light reborn.
Yeah. So this is a great analogy to the parts work that I talk about a lot, which is it's trauma work. But basically, you acquire parts. That's what they're called. When you acquire trauma.
Experience trauma, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
So they're these fragments of who you are that shoot off of the reality of who you are, which is a well-rounded, loving, capable person. These parts are not that. They are fragments. And they're specific to you, to your experience. And and to certain things. There's a great book on parts originally written by Jonathan something. Ugh, I hate myself so much for not remembering his last name. But I'll leave.
I was going to say, if you want to look it up while I talk about the next thing in a minute. But...
I'll leave it in the comments.
Okay.
Or the description or
sure.
something.
Yeah, check down below.
I'll find it and send it to you before you get that set up on the channel.
Yeah, I might be able to do that.
But he came up with this theory of parts, and so many people have taken it so many different directions since then, because that was back in the 90s. I believe it was 95. I think.
Okay.
And in fact, if you watch our playthrough of Final Fantasy VII,
I don't think we've gotten to that point in the game yet, but yes.
But there will be an episode
yes.
where I reference that specific book written by that specific man.
Sorry, go ahead.
And say that it might have something to do with what I saw as a pivot point in the game.
That is on Video Games for All, link in the description down below as we talked about. Feel free to go check it out. And the playlist for Final Fantasy VII is up there. Like I said, we have not gotten through all of them. We have new videos for that series every Wednesday.
But anyway, yeah, so I think that's like a very direct metaphor, a much more like noticeable metaphor maybe even than a lot of what we've seen already, to parts specifically. But I love how it says, you know, the fragments just fall away, you know, and then all of a sudden there's this bright light. So that's like that lens opening.
Sure.
You know? So the lens opening is the fragments falling away. And that bright light is seeing that the world is this big instead of this big.
Yeah. Yeah. And meanwhile, Amy is sitting there thinking of all these wonderful things. And I'm sitting there going, hold on a minute, because this is the last thing that we have written down here at all. But I'm sitting there the whole, like, now at the end of the story, and I'm going, wait. So they're bonded together again. And we're supposed to be happy about this? Kaima killed dozens of people. Mm-hmm. An entire city, or town, or section of a city is just destroyed. There's nothing left of it from the way that the story was written. And we're happy about this? That's just the end of the bright light, end of the story, cool. Dozens are dead. And it's like, what? How is that the end of the story?
Yes, we're happy about it because in parts work, integration is success.
Oh, God.
So those fragments have to come back and form into the one singular self who is that compassionate, well-rounded, capable person who I mentioned before. That integration of all of those parts into the self is, you're done. That is the conclusion of your parts work.
And that's super important. I guess I just don't appreciate from a narrative standpoint.
Yes.
I don't appreciate the implication that, like, it's so important to get this done that damn the consequences for literally every other living being around you. Like, that is an awful lesson to teach. And like you said, that's not the lesson that they were going for because it's not about the story. But it's a story, so of course it's about, you know, like that's why I struggle so much with this, because I'm just like, what do you mean that's the end of the story? Everyone is dead. It's like,
but it's not just a metaphor for the parts work, right? It's also a metaphor for forgiveness. It's doing it in an extreme way. So obviously that kind of a situation, it's going to be hard to forgive.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
But what they're trying to say is, you can sit there and say, I'm a terrible person. I was weak. I betrayed people.
Yeah.
I surrendered. I am a nothing person, right? But in the end, once you do that parts work and you integrate and that stuff falls away, you have a full understanding of the fact that any destruction that you've caused or any destruction that anyone else has caused was a result of this, of being here. That doesn't make it excusable, but you are capable at that point of applying that compassion and that understanding. Oh, you have a hollow too. That's why you went straight from sensing something to instinctive danger. That's why you decided murdering this person made sense.
Yeah, I think he even said that he hadn't seen him yet. He just heard his voice or whatever and immediately took off until he then saw his face and the grin and all that other stuff.
Immediately took off.
Yeah.
Without that real recognition.
Yeah.
Of why he was doing it.
Right. That didn't come till later.
Because that stuff matters, but it doesn't matter. It matters, but it doesn't matter. And all I fucking mean by that is being a horrible person at some point in your life doesn't make you a horrible person now if you can realize that you were and do something about it. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all anyone can expect from you. They can be furious about what it is that you've done. But all they can actually expect of you going forward is for you to take responsibility for that. Recognize that recognition, that was terrible. And that you don't want to be that person anymore, like I said earlier too.
Mm-hmm.
And that you're doing something to fix it, to change. You might not be able to fix the destruction that you caused back then. So how do you fix it? You fix you. You be a better person going forward. That's it.
And even though the narrative didn't really matter, rest in peace to Tatsunari's Toad, eh?
Yeah.
I know you loved him so much.
I loved him.
But if the narrative doesn't matter, I guess he's not really dead. I don't know. I genuinely do want to know from folks. First of all, if it needs to be said, thank you, Amy, for your insight and your wisdom, right?
I love you.
I love you too. And people can leave that as well in the comments down below. But in addition to that, leave your thoughts, leave your opinions. Like, what did you think? Were you closer to how Amy read the story? Were you closer to how I read the story? Or did you have a completely separate perspective and you were like, look, there is a narrative, I enjoyed it, and this is why. We want to know. We want to know all about that. Because if you're that type of a person, or you're the Amy type of a person, or you're the me type of a person, or you're anywhere on the spectrum of a type of person,
we're all the same.
Yes, but we're also all different. Very different.
Yeah.
If you can give your perspective on how you read this story and what it meant to you, whether you have had experiences that could relate to Chishiro or Tatsunari or not, it's still a really great way for you to join your fellow commenters and us as we show off our...
#Vorthos Pride.
That's right. Thank you all so very much for being here. I know this was a bit of a longer one, but again, so was the story. So thank you for joining us for it. We will be back Thursday. I was going to say next week, but that's wrong. Thursday for the 4th side story, I guess, if that's the number that we're going with. The next side story, or the second to last. So we'll be back with that one on Thursday. Definitely stay tuned. Do not forget, as I mentioned, to subscribe and ring that bell so that you will get notifications whenever any of our videos come out, or whenever we go live. Like I said, Mondays and Fridays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Mondays for Magic Monday for MTG Arena, and Fridays for video games, X-Men Legends 2 for the PlayStation 2. So thank you all so very much for being here. I really appreciate it. We talked a lot about Video Games for All as well, Gluten Free for All. Definitely check those out in the description down below, in addition to a link to this story. So,
well, and the book that I'm going to provide.
That will likely be the pinned comment at the top of the comments. So definitely go down there and check that out. And like I said, while you're down there, let us know your thoughts. But for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.